Welcome back to Go For Side Effects. I'm your host, Kevin Simon. Today we got a special guest. His name is Fernando. We're going to get him on the line.
Hello?
Hey, Fernando. This is Kevin with Go For Side Effects. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
Good.
Very well. How are you?
I'm doing good. All right. So I want you to tell everybody, how long you were in the service. Kind of give your story about when you started, what you went into, what branch of the service, and what you did in the service.
Oh, okay. Well, it's kind of a long story. I joined in 1973. I enlisted because they had the draft at that time. And my draft number in my birth year was number 13. So at that time, I was in college, and then about maybe a year or two after that, they ended the deferment. They didn't allow college deferments anymore. So I enlisted because I had more of a choice of where I was going to go. So I enlisted, and I went to Germany 2 years. I went to Fort Benning for basic training, and then I was in Germany. I was in the 8th Infantry Division in Baumholder for a little over 2 years. I actually got out a little early on that enlistment. I don't remember what it was, but it was only 2.5 years. So I got out, got married, went to school, and I enlisted again in 1986, which was more than 10 years later.
You must have missed it pretty bad to join back up.
Well, I grew up in the 50s, and all the kids wanted to be soldiers.
Right.
So I got out. During the time that I got out, it wasn't a real good time in the Army. It was like Vietnam was just ending, and there was a lot of racial tension and drugs, and it was just not like it is today.
Right.
So,
right.
But I always, liked the Army, always wanted to be. So after I got married and had a kid and went to college, I got out, I worked a few years, I enlisted again in 1986. So I was already over 30 years old when I enlisted the second time.
Yeah,
so
is the cutoff age at the age 32 for the Army?
Well, I think it's a lot higher now, but I think at that time, I think it was 36.
36?
Yeah. And actually, it kind of just reminded me because I went to join the Marines first, and I was too old for the Marines. They wouldn't take. Their cutoff was 26 years old. So I just went across the street to the recruiter across the street and joined the Army. Because I had kind of made up my mind that I was going to go back in the service.
Right.
So I enlisted, they had what they call the college option. So I went through a series of exams and tests and interviews. I applied. The option allowed me to, once I was accepted, to go to basic training again, then go to OCS at Fort Benning. So that's what I did. I went back in, I went to basic training, and then in 1987, I went to OCS at Fort Benning. Yeah, wow. It really, it was fantastic. I got commissioned as a second lieutenant and in the Army Medical Service Corps. So I went after there to Fort Sam Houston for training there, and I was there for I think maybe 2 years. And then I went to Germany. So in Germany, I went to Germany in beginning of 1990. So in Germany, I was in the 8th Infantry Division again, years later, and actually not far away from where I was the first time. I was in Bad Kreuznach prison headquarters. And I was a medical platoon leader in a medical company. And I was there for, it was less than a year when Desert Storm started. So I got pulled from the 8th Infantry Division and I went to the 3rd Armored Division, and they deployed to Desert Storm. And I was assigned there to a Battalion Aid Station. So I was a platoon leader in the Battalion Aid Station in 268 Armor. And that's where I did Desert Storm.
Now, where were you at during Desert Storm? Like, what
Man,
part?
I don't know.
All over?
Well, I was in Saudi Arabia. I was with the 3rd Armored Division. So the 3rd Armored Division is a division. I don't know if everybody remembers kind of the history and how it went down there, but the 3rd Armored Division was one of the divisions that did that big left hook and hit the Iraqi, what do they call those guys? The Iraqi Republican Guard on the side. So we were out in the desert. I was out in the desert. We had no idea where we were for months as they were preparing. We were just out there. I guess, since the plan was for the division, that corps, to make that right hook, they were way out in the desert. Not even the Iraqis really knew where we were. So, I mean, everybody kind of knows how everything went down in Desert Storm. But what we were talking about previously, Kevin, was some of the things that we experienced in terms of that may have impacted on the medical health of soldiers.
Right.
Yeah. So, there were, well, I can tell you this thing. I just to kind of start it off, I got a letter from the Department of Defense, and I actually went and pulled it, and I got it right in front of me here. It's dated 1997, and I received this letter, and I'll just read the first paragraph so people can get an idea of some of the things that. Okay. I got this letter from it's from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, July 24th, 1997. Dear Gulf War veteran, you're receiving this letter because we have determined that your unit was near Commissara, Iraq in March 1991. My purpose is to update you on our investigation of U.S. demolitions of Iraqi weapons and what this may mean to you. And then he goes on to say, when rockets were destroyed, the nerve agents sarin and psychosarin may have been released into the air. If you were with your unit at this time, you may have been exposed to low levels of nerve agents. And then it goes on to talk about, registering in the Gulf War registry and talking about telling us to go for
the exams,
medical examinations. And then I actually got a couple of letters. I got another one, 2000, and it just talks about they're following up to see if they're contacting the veterans who were near this place and to see, if there were any issues with them. Let's see what it says here. Well, in this letter, it says that the possible exposure is now considered to be generally smaller than what they believe. So, it kind of just tells us that we may have been exposed.
Right.
To chemicals.
Right.
Now, on the personal side, I was a platoon leader in a battalion aid station, which is the first level of medical care a soldier receives on the battlefield. That's where the medics come from, that unit, all the medics that walk with the infantry guys. And there was after the battles were taking place, these guys were going into bunkers and blowing the bunkers up. I guess that was the standard procedure. Somebody told them to do that, but they were going through, as they progressed on the ground, into any of the bunkers, and they were blowing them up.
Yeah, destroying all the chemicals.
Same thing with Iraqi tanks. Now, it's not known what were on some of those tanks, and it's also not known what was in some of those bunkers. But without going into a lot of detail, because I'm not sure if I should, There was at least one accident that wasn't that I can personally say that I knew happened because I was close in that area, and because they blew up chemical munitions, so not a lot of soldiers got hurt, but a couple of them were severely injured and died. So that I know, when they talk about were there chemical weapons there? Well, there were. Here's another thing I saw one time that it just stuck in my mind because it was so freaking weird. I used to travel sometimes to another unit to either transport soldiers or supplies, right? So we were out in the middle of the desert, and they had the people that lived out there. They were called Bedouins. They were the Arabs that lived out in the desert,
right?
And they were mostly goat herders and camel herders. That's how they lived. And we passed this spot one time, and there were 50 dead goats on the ground, just dead, no wounds, no. And it's hard to describe it. It was so fucking weird. I think they may have been killed by something like chemical or I don't know what, but it certainly was very strange. You never really seen animals lying down like that.
Right.
And why would there be so many of them dead? Just like that, dead, laying there.
Well, y'all around a lot of the burn pits too.
Yeah, not slaughtered or anything, just dead goats. And it didn't make any sense to me. But,
right. Well, I remember all the oil rigs being on fire. I mean, you could look in the desert and see while we're out there when we're pulling into port, smoke rising. It's just that's what a lot of people see. A lot of guys that I've talked to, some believe it's the shots, some believes it's the chemicals, some believes it's a mixture.
And maybe it's been a combination because, you remember there were days where it was dark in the afternoon.
Right.
Because of the fires, those oil fires. So, that certainly cannot be good for you.
Exactly.
But now, something else that you mentioned was the shots that we got. Now, I can tell you this because when I was in Germany, before I deployed with 3rd Armor Division, I worked in the Division Medical Operations Center. So those are the guys that are involved in planning all the medical activity to include what types of shots and vaccinations we're going to be given. So there were a few I can think of one or two that were not FDA approved. They were new. One of them was against a biological agent. I can't remember.
It started with a B. I talked about it last week. It'll
come to me. You see, my memory is bad. It was such a long time ago. There were a couple of types of shots that they were giving against because we suspected that they were nerve agents and chemical agents.
Right.
And I can't remember.
Anthrax was one.
Anthrax was one of them.
Right.
And, that vaccine has not really been tested and approved.
I still don't think it's FDA approved.
Well, they took a chance because they figured, how many people are going to die if this agent is used against, a vaccine, like we're seeing today. Vaccines, all types of vaccines, not just have bad effects.
Right.
But they weigh the odds against, how many people are going to die from this against, how many people can get sick so they take a chance. But,
right. And, I can't remember the name of the little brown pill they gave us. Well, it wasn't little, it was a big brown pill.
Oh, yeah.
And that one was also for nerve agent. And that was not FDA approved. And
Yes.
it's
I forgot the name of it, but I remember now. You sparked my memory. That pill, the way it worked was in the body, it stimulated the nerve agent and it blocked the nerves in your body from receiving the nerve agent.
right.
So I forget the name of that pill, but
Yeah, I think that it's a long name. I think it's a long name. I mean, even if I looked at it, there's no way I could pronounce it. And then, but let the listeners know what all has affected you. How many years were you in, and why did you have to get out?
well, I retired. But let's see. Sometimes it's really hard to make a definite statement of proof that I got sick because of this, or it's not really a proven thing. It's just something that you suspect.
Right.
So, like a few years after I got out, I was having urinary problems. They suspected there was something wrong with my prostate, but it was kind of non-conclusive. But in 2007, I got cancer. And what kind of made me feel a little suspicious as to how I got this cancer was that it was bladder cancer. And I was still very young.
Right.
The doctor told me that I was the youngest person that he had ever done this surgeries that they did on me. So, it could have been exposure to something, and then again, it could not have. It could have been, the fact that I smoke or something like that. But
Right.
Being because I was in my early 50s, and he told me that it was normal for men over 65 to have that type of cancer in their bladder. So, I kind of have my suspicions, but there's no way. And, the 15-year timeline is about right for how cancers, take time to develop.
Right.
So it did take really good care of me. I had to petition to stay on active duty when I was recovering, because they did a lot of surgery, 2 surgeries, and then I had chemotherapy for 8 months. So, but they allowed me to stay on active duty. I think I got lucky because there were a lot of soldiers at that time in 2007 that had sustained injuries, and they wanted to stay in the Army. So the Army was being pretty lenient about letting people, that were missing limbs or were non-deployable to stay in. Because I was non-deployable after that. I had 18 years in the Army.
Yeah.
18 active duty years. So I wanted to stay. I'm not sure if that was a good idea. So I stayed for 2 more years, and then I was able to retire on a regular retirement.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. But the VA gave me a disability. So.
But not just for that, for other stuff too, right?
Yeah, but mostly, there's lots of things.
Right.
But that was really the thing that would probably, I'm in fairly good health, and I get around okay. But in terms of full-time employment, the surgeries and the impact and the stuff that I have to wear now would not, it wouldn't be really allow me to have full-time employment where I have to go every day, week after week, week after week,
Right.
So like I could probably do a job, but who knows, after a couple of weeks, I might have lots of appointments to go to, or I have restrictions about having to be close to a bathroom. Things like that.
Right. And how is the VA? Like, tell me your VA experience.
Well,
I know we talked about back in early 90s, the difference between then and now.
Well, my experience with the VA here has been mostly the Conroe outpatient facility.
Right.
When I first came up here after I retired, I went to that clinic wasn't open yet. And they went to the hospital downtown. I didn't think it was a very good place at all. So I started to use my medical insurance to see the doctors, and I have to regularly see the urologist, and then I had doctors for my back and orthopedic doctors and things like that. But when that clinic opened, I started to go there really because the medications were free.
Right.
That's why I started, honestly. But I found that the clinic up there is really very good.
It's improved.
I had the same doc I think it's probably 8 or 9 years. I've only had 2 different primary care doctors.
Right.
So that I was really impressed with, having the same doctor regularly. They have an orthopedics clinic up there. They have a dental clinic. They have an eye clinic. They have a hearing aid clinic. I got hearing aids there. So I think it's a very good place.
Yeah. I also like downtown.
But, everybody's experience is different.
Mm-hmm. Now, back in the early 90s, I can tell you, I wouldn't let my wife walk into that place in the early 90s when it was in the old section, the old building, because I remember first time I walked in there, I was scared to death. I mean, there were vets laying on the floor screaming and yelling, and them nurses just walked by. Now you walk in there, you don't, I mean, it's like they're attentive, very attentive, and I give them that. But almost every doctor I've seen that talk about my, neuropathy and talk about my kidney problems and stuff like that, they sit there and say, with my last exam, he said the only thing that could have caused it was some type of chemical. It was either digested or put in. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, I was on active duty. When I came back from Desert Storm, I was in Germany. And then I was there for a couple of years. I don't remember how long. But then when I came back to the States, but during that time, I saw a few guys that had gotten sick. One guy, he wasn't a friend of mine, but I knew who he was. I saw him in the gym one day, and he had no hair. His hair fell out. He was sick from something, but he didn't know what it was. Yeah, there were like 3 or 4 guys that I came across that had gotten sick mysteriously. They couldn't explain how these guys got sick.
Right. And I think that's the biggest problem is they just don't know. I mean, till this day, they've been doing research on this, for 30 years, and they still don't know. And I'm grateful for everybody, all the researchers doing everything they're doing, but it's kind of hard to do research when they're not telling us the whole thing. These outside guys that I've talked to, and the neurologist is like, look, we just don't know what all y'all were exposed to. They're not going to come out and tell us.
Right. Well, that is true. I kind of wonder what happened to those guys.
Right.
Because this was a long time, or 30 years ago. That's for sure. There's no proof to what I'm going to say, but for sure, lots of guys got sick, and it wasn't the same sickness. It was different illnesses that guys got when they came back.
And that's the weird part is because, I know a lot of guys that I've talked to, a lot of them have bone problems. They're deterioration of the bones.
Bone and blood issues.
Right. And I really need to podcast everything that they consider presumptive under the Gulf War. Because, see, I don't know if are you under the Gulf War illness or under the Gulf War? Okay,
yeah, see, that's what that letter that I got told me to do at the bottom of the letter to register.
Right. And I mean, I got guys that I talk to that at least once a week I talk to that I was friends with since high school that were over there. They just gave up. I was like, y'all need to be put on this registry. Y'all have no idea the stuff that's coming out now.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true.
I mean, go ahead.
Because you never know, and if you're registered, at least you have something to start with.
Exactly.
Sick, And
I think that's the part that frustrates me the most is trying to get the word out there. But everybody wants to know exactly what was the cause. That's the problem. They're not going to tell us what the cause is, just like Vietnam. Well, we know now it's Agent Orange. Back then, they thought it was safe. You know what? Most of them guys got a big chunk of money, and the VA's like, hey, we'll take care of y'all. We apologize for what happened. I don't blame my doctors for what happened to me. I was proud to sign on that dotted line, and I would do it again. If they were to call me up, I'd be right back where I was, running cranes in the Navy and being on a ship. I loved it to death. Everybody I served with was my family. And I love them dearly. But it's time for the government bureaucracy guys. Why don't they go in there and take the same shots and deal with what we deal with and tell us that they find out what it was?
Yeah. It's really tough now.
Right. I feel sorry for this younger generation coming up. There's so much out there and so much hate, and anger.
Yeah. But I think though, this whole thing, because of when people came back and people started getting sick, and they had no idea, what had caused a lot of these problems. Now, after that time, the deployments that happened after that, they were paying very careful attention to the conditions, and they were monitoring people very closely to see if anybody was getting sick from it. So I think it caused the military to pay attention to the fact that when you deploy soldiers to faraway places, and you're going to give them lots of different prophylactic treatments and their exposure to just a lot of chemicals. Just being in the military, you're exposed to a lot of stuff.
Right.
So I think they're paying a lot of attention to that, and they're monitoring guys that get ill, see what the causes are. So
yeah, I agree. Especially, I just wish they get with mental health. I think that's one of the biggest things I want. I want them, when them soldiers and sailors and come back, I honestly believe that they should send them straight into counseling, especially from combat.
Yeah. They may be doing some things now because, soldier suicide has always been a problem. When I first joined the military, way back when I was a lieutenant, I learned that the suicide rate in the military was much higher than in civilian life.
Right.
Even during peacetime. So when war comes around, it gets even worse. And something that I believe that everyone that deploys, in a situation like Desert Storm, you go away for a few months and you're in a combat zone, even if you're not fighting, everyone comes back with some type of PTSD.
Yeah.
In some way, it affects everyone. Sometimes just being away from home for that long, in a place where you don't know what's going to happen.
Right. I mean,
there's always a disturbance, Just as an aside, I'm starting to remember things. When I came back, I was stationed in Germany because that's where I deployed. So when I came back straight to Germany, and I remember for quite a while, you always have this strange feeling that you don't feel right. And I started to have a lot of issues with my wife, which I didn't quite understand. But she seemed to be very, very upset with me, with my behavior. And I really didn't know, I couldn't figure out why she was upset. But for quite some time, she was very upset. She even moved out of my bedroom to another room. And I couldn't, she said that there was something wrong with it. And I just didn't see what it was.
Right.
So looking back at that now, something had affected my behavior. In that, I just wasn't the same for a few months. And what happens is soldiers don't realize that there's something wrong. Some guys come back with, serious issues, but they can't see it themselves. Their behavior has changed, but they don't look for help because they don't see anything wrong.
Well, that's where the family needs to step in, because I got a real good buddy of mine. His son went off, and he came back, and his son was married, and within 2 months he got divorced. His wife left him. And I was trying to explain to the dad because the dad was mad at him. I was like, y'all do not understand. These guys went over to Afghanistan. They saw stuff that you would never want to dream to see, that your kid had to go through that. And that's why I tell everybody that comes in, when you get out, go get your counselor. I don't care where you go, what you do, get out, especially if you're married, because 9 times out of 10, you're going to get divorced in the military because of stuff that you see.
I think, that now that you're saying that is probably a really good idea. They may be doing it, screening people when they come out, because not only do soldiers not recognize that they've changed in some way, but, there's that thing about you don't want to ask for help.
Right. And that's what
it does things to people. It sure does. Even if you were not killing people, just being in that zone, that area, just, I guess having the uncertainty of what's going to happen to you.
Right.
It kind of, because women come back with issues too. A lot of women too.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. And, some people, everybody's different. I mean, there is no two people alike. I can tell you that right now. I got a twin brother. I can tell you no two people are alike.
All right.
At all, but I do know that it's a lot, even back whenever I was in, because they were just putting women on the ships, right in between Desert Storm and Southern Watch. And that was stressful on them. And I know it had to be stressful on them.
Yeah.
And I think for me, one of the things I think now that probably hits home is, I don't know if y'all had to do this in y'all squadron or whatever, but our captain made everybody write a letter home about he came on, he said, if something was to happen and you die, you need to write your family a letter. And he goes, I want it to be a very personal letter and give it to your closest friend on the ship. And we all carried theirs in their pocket. And I still have my buddies, and he gave me back mine. I've never opened it. It's still in an envelope.
Not an envelope you want to open.
No. And I don't ever want it open. It's in a box in the garage, still sealed up. And I can probably remember word for whatever I wrote. Family support is a big thing. And I had that. I had a great family support. I mean, my brother, well, I don't think my brothers ever wrote me, but my sister, I got a lot of letters from her, my mom, and all my, friends, parents. I got letters all the time.
Yeah.
And the care packages were unbelievable. I think once a week mail call was probably the best thing that could have happened to anybody out there.
Yeah.
But
a letter is a big deal.
It is.
Sure is.
Well, Fernando, I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Sure thing, Kevin.
And thank you for your service and,
And thanks for, trying to bring in awareness.
Hey, I'm glad y'all are able to come on the show and share y'all's story. And this is what it's about. Vets helping vets.
Yes, sir. All right, Kevin.
All right. You have a great night.
Pleasure. You too.
All right, buddy.
Soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
I want to thank Fernando for coming on the show. I think we ought to have a day. I know we got Veterans Day, but, I think there ought to be a day where veterans sit down and they take the day off and all of them get together and talk, share stories. And that's what I'm doing here. I mean, I have several guests and I really appreciate them coming on. I know some of them, probably don't want to be on to share their story because they don't want to remember things. But this is what it's about. Vets helping vets. And the younger generation to understand there's a lot more to the Gulf War than there was, mentioned. And I really, really appreciate everybody coming on and everybody listening. I hope y'all share and like this. If you're interested in coming on to the show, you can email me at kevinsimon@gulfwarsideeffects.com. You can go to our Facebook page. It's Gulf War Side Effects. You can send me a message through there. Look at it. Go to Apple Podcasts. Listen to it. We're also on Anchor, Spotify. Like and share. I want to get the word out there. Thank y'all for listening. Good night.